Now, how often you hear of terrible stories of the things that happen to our children, so often abuse or neglect, or the most terrible accidents, and how often have you seen parents telling you of their pain when their children have been killed or have died simply because something's happened to them? Well, let's speak now to the Minister of Social Development, Lindiwe Zulu. Minister, good afternoon to you, and I appreciate the time. Thank you. What is the aim of Child Protection Week this year? What are you going to be doing over the next few days? Minister, good afternoon. What is the aim of Child Protection Week this year? What are you going to be doing over the next few days?
Hello?
Good afternoon, Minister. You're on live TV. What are you going to be doing? What are you going to be doing over the next few days? What is the aim of Child Protection Week this year?
The aim of the Child Protection Week. Good afternoon, by the way. Can we start there and say good afternoon to you and your viewers? The reason why we are launching this Child Protection Week is something that is done each and every year. And the purpose is really just to highlight the importance of the protection of children by communities, by families, by society at large, by caregivers, and all those that are also supported by government to make sure that they take care of their children. That's the purpose. The purpose is to raise awareness also about the challenges that are faced by some children in their homes, or some children on the streets, or some children who actually also live in centers which are catered for by the Department of Social Development.
It seems sometimes that our society is actually a very dangerous place in which to be a child. Why do you think our society is so dangerous?
Steve, let's start here, Stephen, that we also need to be appreciative of some areas where children are not exposed to all the different dangers of violence, of neglect, because we must also accept that the fact that there are some parents who are doing everything they can to protect the children. But of course, the children who are vulnerable, like the children who we are focusing on, especially those who are orphans, especially those who live in vulnerable environment. This is where we need to focus on as to what kind of environment do we create so that we make sure that children are not exposed to the issues that I raised earlier on. It is a society's challenge where we all need to come together collectively and look at what is it that we need to do to make sure that our children are brought up in safe spaces.
Do you think sometimes we forget that every single adult, that we all have a duty to look after the children that we see? I mean, I sometimes think maybe we forget that we're all part of the village to bring up our children.
Again, I want to go back to thank those parents and caregivers and social workers and everyone who's doing everything they can around the areas where they are to remind civil society, to remind families, to remind teachers in schools, to remind everyone where there are children, that children need our protection. It is not acceptable that we have a high rate of sexual abuse of children. It's not acceptable that we have a high rate of deliberate neglect. It's not acceptable that we have even murder where children are being killed. But having said that, I think what we need to do, both as government, as the NPOs, as NGOs, we need to work together and not work in isolation of each other. Most importantly for the Department of Social Development, our responsibility is also to advocate with all the other departments to say, taking care of children is not only the responsibility of the Department of Social Development. Health is important. Education is important. Transport is important. Even the growth of the economy of South Africa is important, because most times when parents have got jobs and they can be able to earn their living and all that, they are then able to take care of the children. But lastly, for those who are supported by government through the child support grant, we need to keep on reminding them that that money that is given to them directly is not for them. It is money that they are supposed to be using for the upkeep of children.
Many people will always say, you know, the child support grant makes such a big difference to the lives of children and to families. We have food prices that are so high at the moment. people are going to say that maybe we need to increase that grant. I know that that's not up to you. The Minister of Finance is the person you need to talk to. But do you think we need to see something like that, where we make some kind of intervention to help people feed children when food prices are just so high?
Yes, by the way, Stephen, let me remind you and the viewers that last year, the grants were increased, and particularly child support grant was increased based on the fact that prices are going up and based on the fact that in order for us to deal with issues of poverty, we've got to be able to meet the caregivers, the mothers, the grandmothers and grandfathers. We've got to give them a hand by increasing. And may I also say that recently we won an award as Department of Social Development and SASSA for having one of the best poverty alleviation strategies by having these social grants and increasing those social grants, because we focus particularly on the child support grant. And we did this deliberately because we are hoping that the parents, the caregivers, and everyone who gets the money, they use that money for ensuring that the children are taken care of. And also the child support grant is the biggest grant that is given to the caregivers and parents by this government. So we're happy with that. And we should thank also government in general, because when we go to cabinet and when we went to explain why we wanted the child support grant to be increased, finance stepped up to it and agreed to that increase. And gradually, we are also conscious, obviously, of the purse, the government purse, that it has to cater for a whole lot of other things. But we are saying, if we want a better South African, if we want a better child, we have to do everything we can to support those families that are taking care of children.
The place where government really makes its biggest intervention with children, I mean, parents are brought up in homes, mostly. But where government really makes an intervention is in the schooling system. I mean, 9 million children, I think, are in the government schooling system. It's a huge number of children. That's the big intervention. You talk about the amount of money spent on the child support grant, and that makes a huge difference. Do you think we need to also provide more resources in the education system sometimes? I mean, sometimes we see problems around feeding children, for example. All of these are huge things, excuse me, that really need help sometimes. We need more money just to look after children generally.
What we need more than anything else right now is efficiency. What we need is proficient people who work in the offices. What we need is proper systems that should be able to make sure that the money that is being spent by government, and in particular on children, is spent properly. What we need is to hold each other accountable. And what we also need is parents who take responsibility, caregivers who take responsibility beyond taking care of the children when they are in their homes. What we need is to make sure that even the schools where the school feeding scheme is happening, the food that is being fed to those children there is properly cooked, is food that is nutritious, because it's no point, Stephen, to be pouring that amount of money to school feeding scheme. And when you go to the school and you see what kind of food is being cooked for your children. In fact, I was saying the previous week, I wish we could put more money in the hands of parents so that parents can be the one who are able to make sure that when the children leave home, they leave home having been fed. When children go to school, they have their lunchbox properly prepared for them, so that when they are at school and they want this time for lunch, I'm not advocating for not having the school feeding scheme, but I'm also saying taking responsibility has to be much broader than just the food that is cooked at school. And one of the things that I'm also advocating for is to make sure that we have inspectors, health inspectors, who go to these schools where the food is being cooked, to make sure that children are not just eating food to fill up their stomachs. They are eating food that is good food that will help them from a nutritious point of view.
Minister, thank you very much indeed for your time. Really do appreciate it. Lindiwe Zulu is the Minister of Social Development.